Previously, Bobby Fischerman successfully eliminated the octopus and advanced to the semifinals round of the Puzzle Island competition. He was matched up against Captain Blackbeard, and on the other side of the bracket was the Caterpillar versus the Magician. Bobby Fischerman was randomly selected as the one who was going to be solving the puzzles. And as a reminder, what this means is that Captain Blackbeard has 3 chances to try to stump Bobby Fischerman. If he does stump him, Captain Blackbeard advances, but if Bobby Fischerman successfully solves all 3 puzzles, Bobby Fischerman advances to the final. So here's the first puzzle that the captain came up with. Okay, so here's the first position. It's white to play and win. White's pawns are going forward in this direction. Black's pawns are going down here. Before I tell you what Bobby Fischerman saw, if you would like to pause and figure it out on your own, go ahead and do that now. All right, well, if you had a chance to look at that, very interesting position here in that both players have a pawn that's 2 squares from becoming a queen, but white has the extra knight, and also it's white's turn. Now, you can't push the pawn if you're white right away, obviously, because the king just takes your knight and at the same time stops it from becoming a queen. So you do have to make a knight move. And there's really 2 knight moves that make the most sense, knight to a5 and knight to c5, because you're attacking the pawn. It turns out that the correct move is the move knight to a5, which we'll come back to in just a minute. If you try knight to c5, the reason that that doesn't work is black plays b2. You need to try to get your queen, otherwise black's just going to get a queen and you're going to be behind. Notice how the knight does keep the king from chasing down the pawn, so black doesn't have the option to stop you. They do have to just get their own queen. But after you get the queen, black would simply move the king, and if you're white here, you could try to throw in a check. But after king to c7, black's king is very safe. The queen is safe over here, and there's really nothing that you can do as white. It's just a simple drawn position. So going back to the beginning, the only move for white to win the game is knight to a5. And you're going to see the significance of this here in just a second. So of course, again, black doesn't really have many options except to push the pawn. If you tried to move your king, white would simply capture and be in time to defend the pawn. And now black is going to lose once white's king comes up. Okay, so the only option really for black is to push the pawn. And of course, white's going to push their pawn. Again, we have the same thing where the king is boxed out from stopping white's pawn. So the only thing for black to do is get a queen. White gets a queen with check. And now black has 2 options, blocking with the queen and moving the king. The only good one is to block with the queen. And the reason is because if they go here, white has a very nice follow-up. If you would like to pause, how does white win the game from this position? If you had a chance to look at that, it's the move knight to c6 check. And what this move is doing, if you look carefully at the queen, is it's forcing the black king to go right here. Only move for the king. And why is that bad for black? Because it lines up on the same file and allows what's called a skewer. It's a very simple tactic where you have to move one piece out of the way, and as soon as you do, you lose whatever is behind. In this case, it's the queen, and now white simply wins. Okay, so going back to right here, when black was in check, we can see why king to a7 is bad, and therefore black must play queen to b8. Now, if you would like to pause, this is kind of the critical moment in the position where white has to come up with the winning idea. And let me just go ahead and warn you, it's not an easy one to find. All right, well, if you had a chance to look at that, the winning move is queen to a6 check. And essentially what white is trying to do here is force black's king out of the corner. And the way that you do this is by starting a series of checks. And the reason we want to do that is because right now, the king is safe. The queen is defending everything around the king. We can't really do anything with our knight and our queen. You know, this is never going to be checkmate because the queen is always just going to take us. There's really not much we can do. But if we can force the king out of the corner, it opens up other opportunities with their knight, which you'll see in just a second. So black has to play the only move. And now queen to c6 check. And notice how the queen can't block, or we simply take. And so we've started the process of forcing the king out. And then queen to e8 check. Queen to e7 check. Notice how the king is obligated to go back to b6 to defend the queen. If you try to go back and stay in the corner, there's a move here for white, a knight fork, right? We take the queen. So black must play king to b6. And now if you would like to pause, how do we proceed here as white? If you had a chance to look at that, the move is knight to c4 check. And again, it's kind of the same thing, forcing the king to a square that it doesn't want to go to. And the reason we want to do this, well, you'll see it in just a minute. So king to a6 only move because the king has to stay guarding the queen. Otherwise, we would have taken it. Okay. And then we could play the follow-up queen to a3 check. And again, black only has one option, has to go back to b7 because otherwise, like if it tries to run here, we simply take the queen. All right, so king to b7. And if you would like to pause, what do we play now? If you had a chance to look at that, it's the move knight to d6 check. And we're repositioning our knight to deliver the final blow here in just a second. So let's talk about black's options for a moment. Because of the queen attacking the queen, again, black has to go somewhere that defends the queen. If you go here, if you would like to pause, what does white play? If you had a chance to do that, knight to c8. It's a very simple fork, and we win the queen. So black cannot do that. So black has to play either king to a8 or king to b8, and there's a different way for white to win in both of these cases. So let's start with king to a8. If you would like to pause, what can white play to win the game from here? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, it's the move queen to f3 check, and notice how it forces the king to go to b8. You can't block, or we just take it. And then we can follow up with queen to f8 check. And here's kind of the key idea. Finally, after all of that maneuvering, we've forced the king and the queen into a place where we can get a knight fork. That was kind of the point behind all of those shenanigans earlier. And then we simply take the queen. The other option that black had in this position was to go to b8. If you would like to pause here, how does white win from this position? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, the move is queen to b3 check this time. And again, the king can't go here, or we have this same kind of fork idea. So because of that, the king has to go in the corner. If you would like to pause, how does white win from here? Well, if you had a chance to do that, it's not queen to f3 this time because we don't have a follow-up knight fork. But we can go queen to g8 check, forces this. And then you can go queen to d5 check. And watch what happens now. Of course, the queen doesn't want to block, so the king has to go here. And now we actually have checkmate this way. So lots of kind of tricky tactics with the queen and the knight, but you had to sort of lure the king out of the corner before all of that could happen. So very tricky puzzle, but ultimately it does lead to a win for white. And Bobby Fischerman successfully solved that and moved on to the second puzzle that the captain presented him. Here's the second position that the captain presented to Bobby. It's white to play and not lose. Before I say anything else, if you would like to pause, what do you think white's idea should be to save the game? This pawn is going this way. This pawn is going this way. Well, if you had a chance to look at that, let's kind of explain what's going on here. So first of all, black obviously has a queen, which is very dangerous, especially with the knight. And this pawn is also close to becoming a queen, but there's actually an immediate threat here that black has. Let's just say white wastes a move. Black's going to play check. Check forces the king here, and checkmate. Okay, so there is an immediate checkmate threat on white's king if white doesn't do something. So the only move for white is the move rook to a5 check. And notice how the king is completely cut off, so black is obligated to take the free rook. And you can probably see the follow-up, rook to a1 check, lining up on the queen. And if black were to simply play king to b4 and go for this trade, well, then this is easy for white. You take the knight, you're going to take the pawn, and this is going to be a draw. You can just kind of put your king in front here, and it's a drawn position, okay? However, black, when you play check, doesn't play king to b4, but instead goes king to b2. And now when you take the queen, black simply plays the move h2, threatening to get a queen. And if you try to stop it with your king, I just want to point out, black's going to get it anyway because the knight is there. So this position, it's white to play and not lose. What do you do now? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, there's a really clever idea hiding here, and it starts with a check. Now, the first thing that we need to understand here is that if the king ever tries to go towards the rook, like this, let's just say, well, then the rook's going to come down, and now you've successfully covered the square. You can sacrifice your rook, and at the end of the day, you trap the knight, and this is going to lead to a draw, okay? If you're familiar with king and pawn endings, I've talked about this on the channel many times before. This is a drawn position as long as you understand the concept of opposition. You always keep your king opposed to black's king, and black can never really make progress, okay? So that's one point, right? Like, you can't ever go and get the rook with your king, or it allows this. But what you can do if you're black is just slide over, and you're still controlling the square so that the rook can't come down and sacrifice itself. So then we get this series of checks. Check, check, and king to e1, and it looks like black is almost out of the checks after a rook here, king to f1. And now there's no more checks from the white rook. So what do you do if you're white? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, it's the amazing move, king takes g3. You just take the knight. And you say, well, Nelson, that doesn't stop the pawn, and black's going to get a queen, and you're absolutely right. But white has an amazing follow-up. What's the move? If you had a chance to look at that, it's rook to e1 check, which is skewering the king and the queen. You say, but the rook can just be captured, which is true. But once it captures, look at this carefully. It's a stalemate. There's nowhere for the king to move. It's white's turn, but you can't. It's a draw, and you save the game. Very nice idea to go with all those checks and then ultimately sacrifice the rook here for the stalemate trap. Okay, so Bobby Fischerman successfully solved the second puzzle, and now he was presented with the captain's final attempt to stump Bobby. Here is position number 3. It's white to play and win. Before I say anything else, if you would like to pause, white's pawns are going forward. White to play and win. Well, if you had a chance to look at that, the only move here is rook to d8 check. And you're setting up a very nasty finish. Now, before we talk about that, let's talk about some of the other options. Let's say you tried h6, maybe going for a back rank mate. The problem is that you allow black's queen to get into the action. Queen to e2 check actually forks you here. So that's one problem. You would have a similar problem if you tried any other random move with the bishop, right? Like, you're going to run into this. And so the first move kind of has to be this rook check. And now the king obviously has to go to g7. And if you would like to pause, what's the follow-up from here? If you had a chance to look at that, it's the move h6. And at first glance, it's like, wait a second, isn't the king kind of escaping? And isn't this, maybe going to be bad for us? But no, it's not. And after king to f6, we have an amazing follow-up. If you would like to pause again, what's the move here? If you had a chance to look at that, it's the move rook to d6 check. And it's a fork, but of course, the queen can just take us. But we do have a follow-up. What is it? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, it's bishop to g5 check. And look carefully at black's king. Can't go here. You can't go here. You can't stay there. You can't go here or here. Only one move, and it walks into another skewer. Kind of the theme of this study. Lots of skewers we've seen. Here we go. Skewer the king. And when the king goes back, we take it and we win, right? Wrong. That is actually a trap. That is a stalemate for black. Black cannot move the king anywhere. Look at our pieces controlling everything. And so black actually gets away with the draw. So what do you play in this position if you can't take the queen? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, the only move is e5 check, forking these guys. And of course, if the king tries to run, well, then you just take it and you win. So the queen takes. And now we have the amazing bishop to g5 checkmate. See, black's own queen is stopping the king, and our pawn and our king and everything is just playing a role. Even this pawn is playing a role. Amazing stuff, right? Amazing stuff. So Bobby Fischerman successfully solved all 3 of the captain's puzzles, and the captain was eliminated, and Bobby Fischerman advanced to the final. Now, while this match was going on, the Caterpillar and the Magician were battling against each other. And next time, we'll take a look at how their match went and who came out victorious. See you guys next time. As always, thanks for watching. Stay sharp, play smart, and take care.